The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered wooden station in Superior, Arizona territory, and Rose Owens stepped down into what felt like stepping into an oven, her traveling dress clinging to her skin beneath a thick coating of red dust that made her look more like a desert ghost than a proper lady from Philadelphia. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, first by train and then by this bone-rattling stagecoach, and the last stretch through the Arizona desert had been particularly brutal. The driver had warned her about the dust storms that could sweep across the plains without warning, but she had not been prepared for the reality of it. Just an hour outside of Superior, a gust of wind had kicked up such a cloud of dirt that she could barely see her own hands in front of her face, and by the time it settled, she looked as though she had been rolling around in the earth itself. Rose tried to brush some of the dust from her skirts, but it was a futile effort. Her blonde hair, which she had carefully pinned that morning in Tucson, now hung in tangled, dirt-streaked strands around her face. Her green eyes were probably the only clean thing about her, and even they felt gritty from the journey. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, suddenly aware of the eyes watching her from the various storefronts lining the main street of Superior. It was 1883, and the Arizona Territory was still rough country. Superior had sprung up around the mining operations in the area, and the town had that raw, unfinished quality that came with rapid growth and the constant influx of men seeking their fortunes in silver and copper. Rose had known what she was getting into when she answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride, or at least she thought she had. The reality of standing here, covered in filth and exhausted beyond measure, was something else entirely. A tall figure separated itself from the shade of the general store's awning, and Rose's heart began to hammer in her chest. This would be him. James Nash, the rancher who had placed the advertisement that changed her life. She had his letters memorized, each one carefully tucked into her bag, the words revealing a man who was hardworking, honest, and desperately lonely in this vast western landscape. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His dark hair curled slightly at the ends where it touched the collar of his shirt, and his sun-bronzed face was strong-jawed and handsome in a rugged way that made her breath catch despite her exhaustion. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, but he had clearly made an effort, his shirt pressed and his face freshly shaved. James stopped a few feet away from her, and Rose braced herself for disappointment. She knew what she must look like, a far cry from the photograph she had sent him months ago, taken in a proper studio with her best dress, and her hair arranged just so. She had wanted to make a good impression, to show him that she was a respectable woman worthy of becoming his wife. Instead, she looked like she had crawled here through the desert on her hands and knees. His blue eyes swept over her, taking in every dusty inch, and Rose felt her cheeks burn beneath the grime. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain about the dust storm and the terrible conditions of travel, but before she could speak, James smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his entire face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip several beats. "Miss Owens," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "You're still radiant." Rose blinked, certain she must have misheard him. "I beg your pardon, you're beautiful," James said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "A bit dusty, perhaps, but still the prettiest thing I've seen in Superior since I arrived here 5 years ago." She did not know whether to laugh or cry. The tension that had been building in her shoulders since the stagecoach pulled into town suddenly released, and she felt tears pricking at her eyes. She had been so afraid that he would take one look at her and send her straight back to Philadelphia. The journey had cost nearly everything she had, and she had nowhere else to go. "I must look a fright," she managed to say, trying to maintain some dignity even as a tear cut a clean path through the dust on her cheek. James closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and gently took her carpetbag from her trembling fingers. "You look like someone who just traveled over 1,000 miles to start a new life. That takes courage, Miss Owens. Real courage. A little dirt doesn't change that." His kindness undid her completely, and more tears followed the first, though she tried desperately to hold them back. She had been so strong throughout this entire journey, refusing to let doubt or fear overtake her, but his simple acceptance broke through all her carefully constructed walls. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, which only succeeded in smearing more dirt around. "This is not how I wanted to meet you." "This is perfect," James said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that she almost believed him. "Come on, let me get you to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson keeps rooms for travelers and she'll have hot water for a bath. You can rest, get cleaned up, and we can talk properly over dinner. How does that sound?" "Like heaven," Rose admitted, and was rewarded with another one of those devastating smiles. James offered her his arm, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed almost absurd given her disheveled state, but she took it gratefully. Her legs were shaky from the long journey, and the firm support of his muscled forearm was more welcome than she wanted to admit. Together, they walked down the dusty main street of Superior, past the assayer's office and the saloon and the feed store, while curious eyes watched from windows and doorways. "I hope you don't mind the attention," James said quietly. "Superior isn't a large town, maybe 300 people when everyone's here, and new arrivals are always a source of interest, especially when that new arrival is a beautiful woman." Rose felt her cheeks warm again, though whether from his compliment or the stares of the townspeople, she could not say. "Are there so few women here?" "More than there used to be," James replied. "When I first came to Superior, there were maybe a dozen women in the whole town. Now we've got close to 70 or 80, including children. The town's growing, becoming more civilized. We even have a church now and a proper schoolhouse." They reached a 2-story building with a painted sign that read Patterson's Boarding House in neat letters. James held the door open for her, and they stepped into a cool, dim interior that smelled of lye soap and fresh bread. A plump woman with graying hair and kind eyes emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "James Nash, is this your bride-to-be?" the woman asked, her face lighting up with interest. "Mrs. Patterson, may I present Miss Rose Owens, lately of Philadelphia," James said formally. "Miss Owens, this is Mrs. Martha Patterson, who runs the finest boarding house in the territory. The only boarding house in Superior, Mrs. Patterson corrected with a chuckle, but she was clearly pleased by the compliment. She turned her sharp eyes on Rose, and to Rose's immense relief, there was no judgment in that gaze, only sympathy. "You poor dear, that must have been a terrible journey. Come, let me show you to a room and get some water heating. You'll want a bath and a rest before anything else." "Thank you," Rose said, her voice rough with gratitude. "That's very kind of you. James, you come back in about 3 hours, Mrs. Patterson said, already shepherding Rose toward the stairs. "That will give Miss Owens time to make herself presentable, and you might want to clean up yourself. Put on that nice jacket I know you have tucked away somewhere." James grinned, not at all put out by being dismissed. "Yes, madam." 3 hours. I'll make dinner reservations at the hotel restaurant." Rose glanced back at him as Mrs. Patterson led her up the stairs, and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was warmth there, certainly, and something that might have been wonder, as though he could not quite believe she was real. It made something flutter in her chest, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps this mad gamble of coming west to marry a stranger might actually work out. The room Mrs. Patterson showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the street. It was sparse compared to her room in Philadelphia, but there was something honest and welcoming about it that made Rose feel instantly at home. "I'll have my son bring up the tub and hot water," Mrs. Patterson said, already moving toward the door. "You just rest until then. And don't you worry about a thing, dear. James Nash is one of the good ones. He's been working his ranch outside of town for 5 years now, building it up from nothing. He's respected here, honest and hardworking. You could do a lot worse." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Rose said, setting her carpetbag down on the bed. "I appreciate your kindness." The older woman smiled. "We women have to stick together out here. The West can be a hard place, but it can also be a place for new beginnings. I think you and James will do just fine." After Mrs. Patterson left, Rose sank down onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had made it. 3 weeks of travel, of doubt and fear and wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, and she had finally arrived. And the man waiting for her downstairs was nothing like she had feared. He was kind. He had called her radiant when she looked her absolute worst. That had to mean something, didn't it? She pulled his letters from her bag, carefully unfolding the most recent one. His handwriting was strong and clear, the letters formed with care by someone who had not had much formal education, but had worked hard to improve himself. In the letter, he had told her about his ranch, about the cattle he was raising and his plans to expand. He had told her about the loneliness of the work, the long days with no one to talk to but his few hired hands and the endless sky. He had told her he wanted a partner, someone to build a life with, someone to share the burdens and the joys of carving out a home in this wild territory. Rose had been drawn to his honesty. Her own situation in Philadelphia had become untenable after her father's death 2 years ago. He had left debts she had no way of paying, and her options had been limited. Find work as a seamstress or a shopgirl for wages that would barely keep her fed. Accept the unwanted advances of her father's business partner, who had made it clear he expected certain favors in exchange for helping with the debts, or find a husband. The respectable men she knew in Philadelphia had no interest in a woman with nothing to her name, and so she had turned to the advertisements in the back of the newspaper, looking for something, anything, that might offer her a chance at a different life. James Nash's advertisement had been simple and direct. Rancher in Arizona Territory seeking honest, hard-working woman for marriage, must be willing to embrace frontier life. No airs or pretenses. Companionship and mutual respect valued above all else. It had spoken to something deep inside her, a desire for authenticity that her life in Philadelphia had lacked. The society she had moved in was all about appearances and propriety, about maintaining facades even when everything was crumbling behind them. James offered something different, something real. And so she had written to him and he had written back, and over the course of 6 months and a dozen letters, she had come to feel that she knew him at least a little. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson's son, a gangly young man of about 16, brought in a large copper tub, followed by trip after trip with buckets of steaming water. Mrs. Patterson herself appeared with a cake of lavender-scented soap and clean towels. "There now," she said, setting everything on the washstand. "You take your time and get yourself cleaned up. I'll have some tea and sandwiches sent up in a bit. You must be starving." Rose realized she was, in fact, ravenous. She had not eaten since a hurried breakfast in Tucson that morning, and that had only been stale bread and weak coffee. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Patterson. I don't know how I can repay your kindness." "Nonsense. James is paying for the room and the bath, and the food is my welcome gift. Like I said, us women have to look out for each other." She paused at the door, her expression turning more serious. "He's a good man, Miss Owens. I've known him since he came to Superior, and I've never heard a bad word spoken against him. He works hard, treats his hands fair, and keeps his promises. But I want you to know that if you have any doubts, any concerns at all, you just come talk to me. Marriage is a serious business, and you shouldn't feel pressured into anything you're not comfortable with." The kindness and concern in the older woman's voice brought fresh tears to Rose's eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After Mrs. Patterson left, Rose locked the door and began the process of peeling off her filthy traveling clothes. The dress, once a respectable dark blue serge, was so covered in dust that it was nearly brown. Her underthings were not much better. She left everything in a pile on the floor and sank gratefully into the hot water. The bath was heaven. She scrubbed every inch of herself, washing away the dust and grime of travel until her skin was pink and clean. She washed her hair 3 times before she was satisfied that all the dirt was gone, and then she simply sat in the cooling water, letting herself relax for the first time in weeks. As she bathed, she thought about the man she was going to marry. James Nash, her husband-to-be. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, a gentleness and warmth that had made her feel seen and valued despite her bedraggled appearance. He had called her radiant. The word echoed in her mind, making her smile. She climbed out of the tub and dried herself with the soft towels, then dug through her carpet bag for clean clothes. She had packed carefully, bringing only what she could carry, but she had made sure to include her best dress for this first meeting. It was a soft green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, with a modest neckline and delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not fancy by Philadelphia standards, but it was pretty and well made, and it fit her perfectly. She was just finishing pinning up her hair when the promised tea and sandwiches arrived. She ate gratefully, the food simple but delicious. Fresh bread with butter, sliced ham and cheese, and little tea cakes that melted on her tongue. By the time she had finished, she felt almost human again. A glance at the small clock on the mantel told her she still had nearly an hour before James returned. She used the time to unpack her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her hairbrush and other personal items on the washstand. Among her possessions was a small framed photograph of her parents, taken years ago when her mother was still alive. Rose set it carefully on the bedside table, taking comfort in their familiar faces. Her mother had died when Rose was 15, and her father had followed 7 years later, leaving her alone in the world at 22. She was 23 now, old by some standards for an unmarried woman, but still young enough to hope for happiness, for love, for the family she had always dreamed of having. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find James standing in the hallway, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He had taken Mrs. Patterson's advice and cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt under a dark vest, with a string tie at his collar. He held a black jacket over one arm and his hat in his hand, and he looked every inch the respectable gentleman, despite the calluses she could see on his hands and the sun-weathered lines around his eyes. "Miss Owens," he said, and there was a note of awe in his voice as he took in her cleaned-up appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful." Rose felt herself blushing, Thank you, and thank you for arranging the bath and the room. It was exactly what I needed. I'm glad. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain, and Rose found it endearing that this big, capable man could be nervous around her. I made reservations at the hotel restaurant. It's the nicest place in town to eat. I thought we could have dinner and talk, get to know each other a bit better, if that's all right with you. That sounds wonderful, Rose said, reaching for her shawl. It was one of the few nice things she had brought. A soft cream-colored wrap with delicate embroidery along the edges, a gift from her mother years ago. James offered her his arm again, and together they descended the stairs and stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine. The heat had lessened somewhat with the approach of evening, and a pleasant breeze carried the scent of juniper and creosote from the surrounding desert. The hotel was just down the street, a two-story adobe building that was one of the more substantial structures in Superior. The restaurant occupied the ground floor, with tables covered in white cloths and actual glass windows that let in the golden light of the setting sun. It was not fancy by Philadelphia standards, but there was a certain frontier elegance to it that Rose appreciated. James held her chair for her, then took his seat across the table. A harried-looking waitress brought them menus and glasses of water, and Rose studied the offerings with interest. The menu was simpler than what she was used to, but everything sounded delicious to her travel-weary palate. Roast beef, fried chicken, fresh vegetables, and various pies for dessert. Order whatever you like, James said. This is a special occasion. Rose chose the roast beef with potatoes and carrots, and James ordered the same. After the waitress left, an awkward silence fell over the table. Rose found herself studying James's hands where they rested on the white tablecloth. They were large and strong, with prominent veins and those telltale calluses that spoke of hard physical labor. Working hands, honest hands. I'm glad you came, James said suddenly, his blue eyes intense as they met hers. I wasn't sure you would, truth be told. After we'd been corresponding for a few months, I kept waiting for the letter that said you'd changed your mind. Rose was surprised by his admission. I could say the same. I worried that you might reconsider, that the reality of a mail-order bride might seem less appealing than the idea of one. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I don't think I could ever find you less appealing, Miss Owens. Not when you stepped off that stagecoach looking like you'd been through a war, and not now, looking like an angel in that pretty green dress. The compliment made her flush with pleasure, but she needed to be honest with him. I'm not an angel, Mr. Nash. I'm just a woman who found herself with very few options and took what seemed like the best one available. I want to be clear about that. I'm not some romantic heroine, and this isn't a fairy tale. I came west because I needed to, because staying in Philadelphia would have meant. She trailed off, not sure how much to reveal. Would have meant what? James prompted gently. Rose took a breath, deciding that honesty was the best foundation for whatever was going to develop between them. My father died 2 years ago and left significant debts. His business partner offered to help me with those debts in exchange for. Well, in exchange for favors I was not willing to provide. My other options were limited. I could work as a seamstress or in a shop for barely enough wages to keep myself fed and housed, with no prospects for anything better. Or I could try to find a husband. The men I knew in Philadelphia either had no interest in a penniless woman or had the same expectations as my father's partner. Your advertisement offered something different, a partnership, mutual respect, a chance to build something real. That appealed to me. James listened to her entire speech without interrupting, his expression serious. When she finished, he nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, and I want to be equally honest with you. I'm not a rich man, Rose. May I call you Rose? Please do. And I'd like to call you James, if that's all right. I'd like that. He smiled briefly, then continued. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's not large by some standards, maybe 500 acres, but it's mine, paid for with 5 years of hard work. I run cattle, about 200 head at the moment, with plans to expand. I have a house, nothing fancy, just 4 rooms, but it's solid and weatherproof. I employ 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. The work is hard, and there are times, especially during roundup and calving season, when I'm working from before dawn until after dark. It's a lonely life, and I wanted a partner to share it with. Someone to come home to, someone to build a future with. That's why I placed the advertisement. The waitress brought their food, and they paused the conversation while she served them. Once she left, Rose picked up her fork but found herself more interested in continuing their discussion than in eating. What would you expect of me? She asked. As your wife, I mean. What would my role be? James cut a piece of his roast beef, considering her question. I'd expect you to be my partner. To help run the household, certainly, cooking and such, though I can cook for myself if needed. I've been doing it for 5 years. I'd value your opinion on ranch matters, on decisions that need to be made. I'd expect honesty between us and loyalty. Beyond that, he met her eyes directly. I'd hope that we could build something real together, not just a business arrangement but an actual marriage, companionship. Maybe even love in time. Rose's heart was beating faster, and if love doesn't develop, what then? Then we'd still have respect and partnership, James said firmly. I'm not going to force anything on you, Rose. I want you to know that right now. I know some men see a wife as property, but that's not how I was raised. My mother was my father's equal partner in everything, and that's the kind of marriage I want. If you agree to marry me, I promise you that I'll treat you with respect and kindness, regardless of whether romantic feelings develop or not. His words eased a fear Rose had been carrying since she first started corresponding with him. Thank you for that. I want you to know that I'm hoping for more than just a business arrangement, too. I believe marriage should be based on mutual affection and respect, and while I don't expect to fall in love overnight, I'm hoping that we can build toward that. That's all I can ask for, James said, and his smile was warm and genuine. They ate in more comfortable silence for a while, and Rose found herself relaxing into his company. There was something steady and reassuring about James, a quiet confidence that made her feel safe. He was not flashy or overly talkative, but when he spoke, his words had weight and meaning. Tell me about your ranch, Rose said, eager to learn more about the life she was about to step into. What's it like? James's face lit up with enthusiasm, and Rose found herself charmed by the transformation. It's beautiful country, Rose. The ranch sits in a valley with the Pinal Mountains rising up to the east. There's a creek that runs through the property year-round, which is crucial in this climate. The house is built of adobe with a wooden roof, stays cool in summer and warm in winter. I've got a good barn, corrals, the bunkhouse for the hands. There's a kitchen garden that hasn't been tended properly in a while, I'll admit, but the soil is good and there's water for irrigation. The grazing land is mostly good grass, though we have to rotate the herds to keep from overusing it. It sounds wonderful, Rose said, and meant it. She had been worried that she might find the isolation difficult after living in a city, but the way James described it made the ranch sound like a place of peace and possibility. I hope you'll think so when you see it, James said. I know it's different from what you're used to. Superior itself is rough around the edges, and the ranch is even more isolated. But there's a beauty to this land that gets into your blood. The sunsets are like nothing you've ever seen, and the stars at night. You can see the whole Milky Way spread across the sky like a river of light. The poetry in his description surprised and delighted her. You make it sound magical. It can be, he said softly. It can also be harsh and unforgiving. I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. The heat in summer is brutal, and we get dust storms that can bury everything in a few hours. Water is always a concern, and there are dangers, rattlesnakes and the occasional mountain lion. It's not an easy life. I'm not afraid of hard work, Rose said firmly. And I'd rather have an honest life in a harsh place than a comfortable life built on lies and pretense. James reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his own. The touch sent a little thrill through her, his palm warm and rough against her fingers. I think you and I are going to get along just fine, Rose Owens. She smiled at him, feeling a flutter of something in her chest that might have been the beginning of real affection. I think so too, James Nash. They finished their dinner talking about lighter subjects. James told her about the town, pointing out the various characters who ran the local businesses. Rose told him about Philadelphia, about the streets she had walked and the life she had left behind, editing out the harder parts but giving him a sense of who she had been before becoming a mail-order bride. Dessert was apple pie with fresh cream, and Rose declared it the best pie she had ever tasted, which made James laugh and say that she clearly hadn't been eating at the right places in Philadelphia. The ease between them was growing, the conversation flowing more naturally as they discovered shared interests and values. When they finally left the restaurant, full dark had fallen over Superior. The street was lit by lanterns hung outside the various establishments, casting pools of golden light in the dusty road. The air had cooled significantly, and Rose was grateful for her shawl. I should get you back to Mrs. Patterson's, James said, offering his arm. You must be exhausted from your journey. Rose took his arm, enjoying the solid strength of it. I am tired, she admitted, but it's a good tired if that makes sense. I feel like I've arrived somewhere, like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. They walked slowly back to the boarding house, neither of them in a hurry to end the evening. When they reached the front steps, James turned to face her, still holding her hand. Rose, I know this is all happening very fast. We've only just met in person, and I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. I thought maybe we could take a few days to get to know each other better before we make any final decisions about the wedding. If you want to change your mind, if you decide this isn't what you want after all, I'll make sure you have the funds to get back to Philadelphia, no questions asked. I want you to know that you have that option. His consideration touched her deeply. Thank you for that, James. But I don't think I'll be changing my mind. I came here to marry you, and unless you've changed your mind, that's still what I want to do. I haven't changed my mind, he said quickly. Not for a second, but maybe we could court properly for a few days. Let me show you the ranch, introduce you to the hands, let you see what life would really be like. Give us both a chance to be sure. Rose nodded, seeing the wisdom in his suggestion, even as part of her wanted to rush forward to make this official before anything could go wrong. That sounds reasonable. How long were you thinking? A week, James suggested. I could come into town every day, we could spend time together, and then if you're still willing, we could have the ceremony next Saturday. That would give you time to get a dress made if you want, or we could keep it simple. Whatever you prefer. A week sounds perfect, Rose agreed. And I don't need anything fancy for the wedding. Simple is fine with me. James raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Thank you, Rose, for taking a chance on this on me. I promise I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. The kiss, chaste as it was, sent warmth flooding through her entire body. I believe you, James. He waited on the porch while she went inside, and Rose could feel his eyes on her until she reached the top of the stairs and turned the corner toward her room. Once inside with the door locked behind her, she leaned against it and let out a long breath. This was really happening. She was going to marry James Nash, was going to become a rancher's wife in the Arizona territory. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, could still hear the sincerity in his voice when he promised to make her happy. She prepared for bed in a daze, washing her face and brushing out her hair before changing into her nightgown. As she lay in the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, she thought about the week ahead. A week of courting, of getting to know the man she was going to marry. A week to be sure that she was making the right decision. But somehow, deep in her heart, she already knew. James Nash was a good man, an honest man, and he had looked at her with such warmth and respect that she felt valued in a way she never had before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficulties frontier life might bring, she would face them with him by her side. Sleep came easily, and for the first time in months, Rose's dreams were peaceful. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Rose woke to the sound of activity in the street below. She dressed in one of her simpler dresses, a practical brown cotton that would be suitable for a tour of the ranch, and pinned her hair up in a neat bun. Mrs. Patterson had breakfast waiting when Rose came downstairs, fresh eggs and bacon with thick slices of toasted bread and strong coffee. "James sent word that he'll be by at 9 to take you out to the ranch," Mrs. Patterson said, setting a plate in front of Rose. "That man's been up since before dawn, I'd wager, making sure everything is perfect for your visit." Rose smiled at the thought. "He seems very conscientious." "That he is," Mrs. Patterson agreed, pouring herself a cup of coffee and sitting down across from Rose. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you seem like a good match for him. He needs someone sensible, someone who won't fall apart at the first sign of difficulty. Ranch life isn't easy, and a lot of city women can't handle it. I may be from the city, but I'm not afraid of hard work," Rose said. "My mother taught me to cook and sew and manage a household, and I'm willing to learn whatever else I need to know." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. And James is a patient teacher. He'll help you learn the ways of things out here." True to his word, James arrived promptly at 9, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped Rose up onto the seat beside him, and they set out through the town toward the surrounding countryside. The morning was beautiful, the air still relatively cool and clear. As they left Superior behind, the landscape opened up around them, vast stretches of desert punctuated by rocky outcroppings and distant mountains. The vegetation was sparse but fascinating, unfamiliar plants like saguaro cacti and prickly pear and various shrubs that James pointed out and named. "That's creosote bush," he said, indicating a low, spreading plant with small leaves. "It smells amazing after it rains, and those are ocotillo, the tall, spindly ones. They look dead most of the year, but after rain they sprout green leaves and red flowers practically overnight." Rose listened with interest, filing away the information. This was her new world, and she wanted to understand it, to learn its rhythms and secrets. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes, and Rose used the time to ask James questions about everything she saw. He was a patient and knowledgeable guide, explaining the challenges of ranching in the desert, the importance of water management, the seasonal patterns that governed life in the territory. When they crested a rise, and the ranch came into view below them, Rose caught her breath. James had not exaggerated about the beauty of the place. The house sat in a small valley, sheltered by rocky hills on one side and opening onto grassland on the other. A line of cottonwood trees marked the path of the creek James had mentioned. Their green leaves a vivid contrast to the browns and golds of the surrounding landscape. The house itself was low and sprawling, built of reddish adobe that seemed to grow naturally from the earth. Outbuildings were scattered around it, including a substantial barn and several corrals. "It's beautiful," Rose said softly. "James, it's absolutely beautiful." The pleasure in his face at her words was unmistakable. "I'm glad you think so. I know it's not much compared to what you're used to, but I've put my whole heart into this place." "It shows," Rose said. "I can see the care you've taken with everything." As they approached the house, 3 men emerged from the barn, clearly curious about their visitor. James pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Rose down, then turned to introduce her. "Rose, these are my ranch hands. That tall one is Tom Winters. He's been with me for 3 years. The one with the red beard is Sam Cooper. He's been here 2 years. And the young one is Danny Peterson. Just joined us this spring." The men removed their hats respectfully, and Rose greeted each of them with a smile. Tom was probably in his late 30s, weathered and quiet. Sam looked to be in his mid-20s, with a friendly face and warm brown eyes. Danny couldn't have been more than 19, gangly and shy, his face flushing red when Rose spoke to him. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Tom said, speaking for all of them. "Boss has been talking about you coming for weeks. It's good to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Rose said. "I hope I won't be too much of a disruption to your routine." Sam grinned. "Madam, having a woman's touch around here will be nothing but an improvement. The boss is a good cook, but we've been eating the same 5 meals in rotation for years." "I'll see what I can do about that," Rose promised, making them all laugh. James showed her around the property, taking her through the barn where the horses and milk cows were kept, past the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched in the dirt, around the corrals where some of the horses lifted their heads to study her with curious eyes. Everything was well maintained and organized, speaking to James's dedication and hard work. The house itself was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace at one end and a sturdy table with chairs in the center. The kitchen area had a good iron stove, shelves of dishes and pots, and a work counter. 2 doors led off the main room, one to a bedroom and one to a small room that James had been using for storage. "I thought we could make that second room into a proper bedroom," James said, showing her the space. "Eventually, if we have children, we could add on another room or 2. The structure is sound enough to support additions." The casual mention of children made Rose's heart skip, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "That sounds like a good plan." The main bedroom was modest but pleasant, with a large bed covered in a simple quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out toward the creek and the mountains beyond. "I know it's not fancy," James said, watching her face anxiously, "but it's comfortable, and the adobe keeps it cool in summer and warm in winter." "It's perfect," Rose said honestly. "James, I grew up in a nice house in Philadelphia, but it was never really a home, not after my mother died. This feels like a home. You've made it into something special." The relief and pleasure in his expression made her want to hug him, but she restrained herself. They were still practically strangers, despite the strange intimacy of their situation. They spent the rest of the morning together, with James showing her around the ranch and explaining the daily operations. Rose met the cattle, a herd of robust longhorns grazing in a distant pasture, and learned about the seasonal work of ranching, the challenges of predators and disease, and the unpredictable Arizona weather. Lunchtime found them back at the house, where James prepared a simple meal of cold roast beef sandwiches and fresh vegetables from the garden. As they ate at the big wooden table, Rose looked around the room and tried to imagine herself here, cooking at that stove, sitting in this chair, living this life. "What are you thinking?" James asked, watching her face. Rose met his eyes and found herself being honest. "I'm thinking that I could be happy here. I'm thinking that this is exactly the kind of life I've been hoping for, even if I didn't quite know it until now." James reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm glad. I was worried you might find it too isolated, too different from what you're used to." "It is different," Rose admitted, "but different isn't bad. In Philadelphia, I felt like I was suffocating, like I was trapped in a life that would never change or grow. Here, I can see possibilities. I can imagine building something, creating a real home, maybe even having a family someday. It feels like a beginning instead of an ending." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say," James said, his voice rough with emotion. They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship. James had work to do, and Rose insisted on helping where she could. She collected eggs from the chicken coop, getting acquainted with the hens, and helped James in the kitchen garden, learning which plants were which, and discussing what she might plant in the future. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, James drove her back to town. They talked easily during the ride, the conversation ranging from practical matters like wedding arrangements to more personal topics like their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want you to know," James said as they approached Superior, "that this week of courting, it's not just for you to decide if you can accept this life. It's for me to prove that I can be the kind of husband you deserve. I want to earn your trust, Rose. I want you to feel confident that you're making the right choice." "I already feel confident," Rose said softly, "but I appreciate the time to be certain, and I'm enjoying getting to know you, James. Every conversation we have makes me more sure that we're well suited." He walked her to the door of the boarding house, and this time when he kissed her hand in farewell, Rose felt a definite flutter of something more than just appreciation. She was beginning to care for this man, to feel genuine affection that went beyond gratitude or pragmatic acceptance. The week that followed established a pattern that Rose found deeply satisfying. James came to town every morning and they spent the days together. Sometimes they stayed in Superior, and James introduced her to the various townspeople. Rose met the doctor, a gruff but kind man named Dr. Harrison, and his wife Elizabeth, who welcomed Rose warmly and invited her to the ladies' sewing circle that met every Wednesday. She met the school teacher, Miss Andrews, and the minister, Reverend Johnson, who would be performing their wedding ceremony. Other days, James took her back out to the ranch, and Rose began to feel more at home there with each visit. She learned to milk the cow, a skill that made her absurdly proud when she finally mastered it. She started planning improvements to the kitchen garden and began reorganizing the kitchen to make it more efficient. The ranch hands grew accustomed to her presence, and she learned their individual quirks and preferences. Sam, she discovered, had a sweet tooth and appreciated when she baked cookies or cake. Tom was quiet but observant, and he had a wealth of knowledge about ranching that he shared generously when asked. Danny was still shy around her, but he was eager to help with any task she needed, and she found his youthful enthusiasm endearing. But it was the time alone with James that Rose treasured most. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on some topics and friendly disagreements on others. James had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was well-read, despite his limited formal education, and they discussed books and ideas with enthusiasm. and slowly, carefully, they learned to be physically comfortable with each other. It started with small things. James helping her down from the wagon and letting his hands linger on her waist, Rose straightening his collar before they went into town, their knees touching under the table during meals. Each touch built on the previous ones, creating a growing awareness and attraction between them. On the Thursday before their Saturday wedding, James took Rose for a ride to a spot up in the hills where he said the view was spectacular. They rode horses this time, James having taught her the basics of riding over the past few days, and Rose felt a thrill of accomplishment as she managed to stay in the saddle without too much difficulty. The spot James brought her to was a flat outcropping of rock that jutted out from the hillside, offering a panoramic view of the valley below. The ranch was visible in the distance, looking like a toy model from this height, and beyond it stretched mile after mile of Arizona territory, beautiful and harsh and vast. They sat together on the warm rock, James pointing out various landmarks and Rose simply absorbing the incredible scope of the landscape before her. The wind tugged at her hair, pulling strands loose from her bun, and the sun beat down with fierce intensity. But Rose had never felt more alive. "I love it here," she said suddenly. "I love this land, this place. I never expected to feel that way so quickly, but it's true." James turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the bright sunlight. "Rose, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been wanting to say all week, but I didn't want to rush things or make you feel pressured." Rose's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," James said simply. "Maybe I started falling in love with you through your letters, I don't know. But this week, getting to know you in person, seeing how you interact with the hands and the townspeople, watching you at the ranch like you were born to be there. Rose, you're everything I hoped for and more. You're smart and capable and kind, and you make me laugh, and when I imagine my future now, you're in every part of it. I know it's soon, and I know we agreed this week was just for courting, but I wanted you to know how I feel. I'm in love with you." Rose felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these were happy tears. "James, I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first moment when I stepped off the stagecoach covered in dirt, and you told me I was radiant. No one has ever made me feel as valued and respected as you do. No one has ever looked at me the way you do, like I'm something precious. I came west looking for a new beginning, for a partnership, and I found so much more than that. I found you." James reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Rose whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Rose met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, a gentle exploration, and then with more confidence as they discovered how perfectly they fit together. James's hand slid from her cheek to cradle the back of her head, and Rose gripped his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world seemed to tilt around them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "2 more days," he said. "2 more days and you'll be my wife." "I can't wait," Rose said honestly. They sat together on that rocky outcropping for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley, talking about their plans for the future, stealing kisses, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Rose felt a peace settling over her that she had never experienced before. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. The next day, Friday, was a flurry of wedding preparations. Mrs. Patterson helped Rose alter one of her nicer dresses, a soft cream-colored silk that Rose had brought from Philadelphia. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown, but with some lace added at the neckline and sleeves, It would be perfect for a simple frontier wedding. Elizabeth Harrison, the doctor's wife, brought over a bouquet of wildflowers that she had gathered from the countryside, cheerful yellows and purples that would be perfect for Rose to carry. Several of the women from the sewing circle stopped by with small gifts: a set of embroidered dish towels, a recipe for the best sourdough bread in the territory, a jar of preserves. Rose was touched by the welcome she was receiving from the community. These women barely knew her, but they were already embracing her as one of their own, helping her prepare for her new life. It was so different from the cold formality of Philadelphia society, where everything was about appearances and position. Here, kindness and community seemed to matter more than pedigree or money. James came by that evening with a small velvet box, his expression nervous. "I know we're keeping things simple," he said, "but I wanted you to have this." Inside the box was a simple gold wedding band, but next to it was a second ring, a delicate gold band with a small diamond set in it. Rose gasped. "It was my mother's engagement ring," James explained. "She passed away 5 years ago, just before I came west. My father gave this to me and told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I know we haven't known each other long, but Rose, I'm absolutely certain that you're that woman. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Rose felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the beautiful ring. "James, I can't. This is too much. This is a family heirloom." "And you're going to be my family," James said firmly. "Please, Rose, let me give this to you. Let me give you everything I have." "Yes," Rose whispered, hardly able to speak past the lump in her throat. "Yes, I'll wear it. I'll treasure it." James slipped the engagement ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Rose stared at it, this symbol of his love and commitment, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and joy. That night, she barely slept, too excited and nervous about the wedding the next day. She kept touching the ring on her finger, reassuring herself that this was real, that she was truly about to marry the man she loved. Saturday dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for a wedding. Rose dressed carefully in her altered silk gown, and Mrs. Patterson helped her arrange her hair in an elegant style with some of the wildflowers woven into it. When Rose looked at herself in the small mirror, she was startled by how radiant she looked. Her eyes were bright with happiness, her cheeks flushed with excitement, and the cream dress made her skin glow. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, her own eyes suspiciously wet. "James is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Rose said softly. The wedding was held in the small church at 11 in the morning. It wasn't a large affair, just James and Rose, the minister, and about 30 townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony. James's ranch hands were there, all cleaned up and wearing their Sunday best. Elizabeth Harrison had come with her husband, as had several of the women from the sewing circle. But Rose only had eyes for James, standing at the front of the church in a dark suit that she had never seen him wear before, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. When she began walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy and love that Rose felt her heart might burst. Reverend Johnson performed a simple but beautiful ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bonds of marriage. When it came time for the vows, James took both of Rose's hands in his and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "I, James Nash, take you, Rose Owens, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support you and stand beside you through whatever life may bring. You are my heart, Rose, and I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Rose was crying openly now, but she managed to speak her own vows through the tears. I, Rose Owens, take you, James Nash, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support you and stand beside you through whatever life may bring. You gave me a new beginning when I needed it most, James, and I will love you for that and for so much more, every day for the rest of my life. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife and told James he could kiss his bride, James pulled Rose into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness and passion that several of the women in the congregation sighed audibly. They walked back down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. James Nash, and Rose felt like she was floating. The townspeople congratulated them warmly, and there was a small reception in the church hall where someone had arranged refreshments and cake. But Rose was eager to begin her new life, and it wasn't long before she and James said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride out to the ranch. Someone had tied tin cans to the back of the wagon, and they rattled noisily as they drove out of town, making both James and Rose laugh. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Rose kept touching her rings, the engagement ring and the new wedding band that James had slipped onto her finger during the ceremony. She was married. She was Mrs. James Nash. The reality of it was just beginning to sink in. When they arrived at the ranch, the hands had made themselves scarce, giving the newlyweds privacy. James helped Rose down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," James said, grinning at her. "It's traditional." He carried her into the house and didn't set her down until they were in the bedroom. When he finally lowered her to her feet, they stood facing each other, suddenly shy despite the deep feelings between them. "Rose," James said softly, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "I love you. I know this is all happening fast, but I want you to know that I meant every word of my vows. You're my partner, my equal, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Rose whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love you, James. I love you so much." What followed was a sweet and tender coming together, both of them nervous but eager to express their love physically as well as emotionally. James was gentle and patient, making sure Rose was comfortable, and Rose found herself overwhelmed by the intimacy and beauty of what they were sharing. Afterward, they lay together in the big bed, Rose's head on James's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting golden patterns on the walls, and somewhere outside a bird was singing. "Are you happy?" James asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Rose said honestly. "A month ago I was alone in Philadelphia, terrified about the future. And now I'm here, married to the most wonderful man, starting a new life in this beautiful place. It doesn't seem quite real." "It's real," James assured her, "and it's only going to get better. We're going to build something amazing together, Rose. I can feel it." And Rose believed him. As she lay in her husband's arms in their home, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening around them, she felt a certainty deep in her bones. This was her place. This was her purpose. This was her love story, and it was only just beginning. The days and weeks that followed established them in the rhythms of married life. Rose took over running the household, and she found that she loved the work. She reorganized the kitchen to her satisfaction, planted new vegetables in the garden, and began experimenting with recipes that made the ranch hands declare her the best cook in the territory. She learned the skills she needed for ranch life with determination and good humor. James taught her to ride properly, and soon she was accompanying him on his rounds of the property. She learned to recognize the signs of illness in cattle, how to mend fences, and a dozen other practical skills that made her a true partner in running the ranch. But it wasn't all work. James made sure they took time for themselves, for rides into the hills to watch the sunset, for quiet evenings sitting together on the porch while the stars came out, for stolen kisses in the barn that sometimes led to more. Their physical relationship deepened and grew, the initial shyness giving way to a passionate and loving connection that left Rose feeling cherished and desired. The townspeople embraced Rose fully as one of their own. She joined the sewing circle and made genuine friends among the women of Superior. Elizabeth Harrison became particularly close to her, and the two women often visited back and forth. Rose found that she enjoyed the simplicity and authenticity of frontier friendships, so different from the superficial social connections she had known in Philadelphia. 3 months into their marriage, Rose began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be certain before telling James, wanting to be absolutely sure. When she finally confirmed it with Dr. Harrison, she could barely contain her excitement. She told James that evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. James looked at her, his expression confused at first, and then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Rose, are you?" "We're going to have a baby," Rose said, tears of joy streaming down her face. In about 6 months, if Dr. Harrison's calculations are correct. James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're going to have a baby. Rose, I'm going to be a father." "And I'm going to be a mother," Rose said, laughing and crying at the same time. "James, I'm so happy. I never thought I could be this happy." "I love you," James said, pulling back to look at her face, his own eyes wet with tears. "I love you so much, Rose. You've given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You're everything to me." "And you're everything to me," Rose said, kissing him softly. The pregnancy was not always easy. Rose suffered from morning sickness for the first few months, and as her belly grew, she found the Arizona heat increasingly difficult to bear. But James was wonderfully attentive, making sure she rested when she needed to, helping with the household tasks when she was too tired or uncomfortable to manage them herself. The townswomen rallied around her as well, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offering reassurance when Rose worried about whether she would be a good mother. Elizabeth Harrison was particularly helpful, having raised 3 children of her own, and she became something of a mentor to Rose during those months. In late spring of 1884, after a long and difficult labor, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas James Nash, after James's father and James himself. Tom, as they called him, had a shock of dark hair like his father and eyes that would eventually settle into the same vivid blue. James was besotted with his son from the first moment he held him. Rose would often wake in the night to find James standing over the cradle, just watching Tom sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. He was a devoted father, helping with feedings and diaper changes and walking the floor with Tom when he was fussy, never complaining about the lost sleep or the demands of an infant. The ranch hands were equally charmed by little Tom. Sam whittled him a set of wooden toys. Tom Winters taught him to recognize bird calls before he could even talk, and Danny was always willing to watch the baby when James and Rose needed a few minutes to themselves. Rose had never imagined she could love something as much as she loved her son, except for James. The two of them together, her husband and her child, were her entire world. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, growing from 200 head of cattle to over 300. James hired 2 additional hands to help with the increased workload, and there was talk of buying adjacent land to expand their grazing territory. Life was good. Hard sometimes, certainly, with the constant demands of ranching and raising a child, but deeply satisfying in a way Rose's old life in Philadelphia had never been. She felt useful here, valued not just for her appearance or her social connections, but for her actual contributions to the family and the ranch. She felt loved, truly and deeply loved, by a man who showed her that love in 100 ways every day. When Tom was 18 months old, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because Tom kept her so busy that she had less time to focus on the discomforts. In early 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose Nash, a tiny, perfect baby with blonde hair and green eyes like her mother. James was just as devoted to Sarah as he had been to Tom, and watching him with their children made Rose fall even more deeply in love with him. He was patient and playful, teaching Tom to ride a gentle pony and singing lullabies to Sarah in the evenings. The house rang with laughter and love, and Rose often found herself pausing in her work just to absorb the joy of it all. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Tom grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch. Sarah was more reserved but equally bright, showing an early aptitude for reading and numbers that delighted both her parents. 2 more children followed. Another boy, William, in 1888, and a second daughter, Margaret, in 1890. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the Superior area. James's reputation as an honest and skilled rancher grew, and he was often consulted on matters affecting the local ranching community. Rose became known as much for her business acumen as for her household skills, and she managed the ranch finances with a careful eye that ensured their continued growth and stability. Superior itself was growing and changing. The town had over 1,000 residents now, with new businesses opening regularly. There was talk of bringing a railroad spur to town, which would make it much easier to ship cattle to market. The rough frontier edges were slowly being smoothed away, replaced by a more settled, civilized community, though the essential character of the place remained through it all. Rose and James's love for each other only deepened. They still took time for themselves whenever possible, riding out into the hills or simply sitting together on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing. Their physical relationship remained passionate and loving, a source of joy and connection that sustained them through the challenges of raising a family and running a ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Rose with a gift. He led her outside to show her a new structure that had been built behind the main house while she was visiting Elizabeth in town the day before. It was a beautiful addition to the house, 2 new bedrooms and a proper parlor, giving them more space for their growing family. "James, this is too much," Rose said, even as she admired the fine craftsmanship and thought about how wonderful it would be to have more room. "Nothing is too much for you," James said, pulling her into his arms. "You gave up everything to come west and marry a stranger. You've built this life with me, worked beside me, given me 4 beautiful children, and made me happier than I ever thought possible. A few extra rooms are the least I can do." "I didn't give up everything," Rose corrected him. "I gave up a life that was making me miserable." "You gave me everything that matters: love, family, purpose, and a home. I'm the one who should be thanking you." "How about we call it even?" James suggested, kissing her softly. "We gave each other everything that matters." Rose smiled against his lips. That sounds about right. As they stood there together, 10 years after that first meeting when Rose had stepped off the stagecoach covered in dirt and James had told her she was radiant, Rose reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had taken the biggest risk of her life when she answered that advertisement, when she boarded that train east to west, when she committed to marrying a man she had never met, and it had been worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. It had been worth the difficult journey, the dust storms, the challenges of adapting to a new life, because it had brought her here, to this moment, standing in her husband's arms on the land they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. The sun was setting over the Pinnell Mountains, painting the sky in those glorious shades of orange and purple that James had promised her all those years ago. The children's voices drifted out from the house, arguing cheerfully about something. The cattle lowed in the distance, a peaceful sound that spoke of the ranch's continued prosperity. "I love you, James Nash," Rose said, looking up into her husband's face, still as handsome to her now as it had been that first day, perhaps even more so with the added character that time and experience had given it. "I love you, Rose Nash," James replied, his blue eyes warm with the depth of his feeling. "My radiant Rose, my everything." And as they stood together watching the sunset, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. Their love story, which had begun with such uncertainty a decade ago, had become the foundation of a life richer and more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joys and challenges. The children grew, each developing their own unique personalities and talents. Tom showed his father's aptitude for ranching and his mother's head for business. Sarah, brilliant and determined, set her sights on becoming a teacher. William was the charmer of the family, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile. And little Margaret, the baby, was fearless and adventurous, keeping everyone on their toes. Rose and James grew older together, their love maturing into something even deeper and more precious than the passionate romance of their early years. They learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, to support each other through difficult times and celebrate together during good ones. When Tom turned 18 in 1902, he took on more responsibility at the ranch, working as a full partner with his father. Sarah went away to normal school to train as a teacher, and though Rose missed her terribly, she was proud of her daughter's ambition and determination. William showed an interest in the cattle business beyond just the ranching aspect, talking about markets and distribution in ways that reminded Rose of James's forward-thinking approach. And Margaret, at 12, was already showing signs that she might be the one to really shake things up, talking about wanting to go to university and become a lawyer. The ranch had grown significantly over the years, now encompassing over 1,500 acres and running nearly 1,000 head of cattle. James and Rose employed a dozen ranch hands and had built a real community around their operation. Several of the hands had married and started families, and there was a small cluster of houses near the main ranch where they lived. On a warm evening in late spring of 1903, James and Rose sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the past 20 years. Their children were all inside, the older ones helping the younger ones with various tasks. The sound of their voices, arguing and laughing, was a comforting backdrop. "You ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Coming west, I mean, marrying a stranger, giving up the life you knew for this?" Rose turned to look at him, surprised by the question. After all these years, after everything they had built together, how could he even wonder? "Not for a single second," she said firmly. James, that life I left behind wasn't really living. I was just existing, waiting for something to happen. You gave me a real life. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me everything that matters. James took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was as familiar as breathing after 20 years of marriage. You gave me the same things. Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch but not really living. You brought light and laughter and love into my life. You made this house a home. You gave me children I adore and a partnership that makes every day better. We're pretty lucky, aren't we? Rose said softly. The luckiest, James agreed. And you know what? You're still radiant, Rose, even more so now than the day you stepped off that stagecoach covered in dirt. Rose laughed, the sound full of joy and love. And you're still the man who could see past the dirt to what was underneath. You've always seen the best in me, James. You've always made me feel valued and loved. That's because you are valued and loved, James said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. More than you could ever know. As the sun set over the Arizona landscape, they both loved, casting its golden light over the ranch they had built together. Rose reflected on the incredible journey of the past 20 years. She had arrived as a mail-order bride, a desperate woman taking a huge gamble on an uncertain future. She had become a wife, a mother, a rancher, a pillar of her community, and most importantly, she had become the beloved partner of a man who had shown her what real love looked like. Their story had started with uncertainty and hope, with dust storms and kind words, with a stranger who saw beauty where others might have seen only dirt. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a love that had weathered every challenge and grown stronger with each passing year. And as Rose sat there with her husband's hand in hers, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created together, she knew that their love story was far from over. There were still years ahead of them, years of watching their children grow and start families of their own, years of continuing to build and improve the ranch, years of sitting together on this porch watching the sunsets. But whatever those years brought, Rose knew they would face it together, just as they always had. Because 20 years ago, a dusty, desperate woman had stepped off a stagecoach, and a kind, lonely rancher had seen past the dirt to the radiant soul beneath. And from that unlikely beginning, they had built a love that would last forever. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, those brilliant Arizona stars that James had promised her all those years ago. Rose leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, and thought about how perfectly everything had turned out. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" James asked. "For seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you for the same," James said, kissing the top of her head, "and for being brave enough to take a chance on a stranger with a dream." "Best decision I ever made," Rose said. "Mine too," James agreed. And there, on the porch of the ranch they had built together, surrounded by family and blessed with a love that had only grown stronger over 2 decades, Mr. and Mrs. James Nash watched the stars come out over the Arizona territory they called home, knowing that their love story was one for the ages, a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the kind of love that sees beauty even in the dustiest of circumstances. Their children would tell the story for years to come, of how their mother arrived covered in dirt, and their father declared her radiant, of how a mail-order bride and a lonely rancher found in each other exactly what they needed. And their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren after them would know that true love was possible, that taking risks could lead to the greatest rewards, and that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the happiest endings. As the night deepened, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Rose and James remained on the porch, content in each other's presence, grateful for every moment of the beautiful life they had created together. Their love story, born in dust and uncertainty, had blossomed into something radiant and enduring, a shining example of what was possible when two people committed to building a life together with honesty, respect, and abiding love. And they lived happily, surrounded by family, and sustained by a love that never faded for all the rest of their days.